Let me introduce myself. My name is Marek Harsdorff from the Green Jobs program of the International Labour Organization. And today in that session we will discuss about green entrepreneurship. Let me start in medias res, asking you what is entrepreneurship? What is the main objective of entrepreneurship? If you ask me, as a businessman, I would say the main objective of entrepreneurship is profit. So let's start with that idea that entrepreneurship is about profit. And now let's see what is green. Green is typically just a color. Nevertheless, it's a fancy term in those days, meaning basically in economic theory and in economics means natural capital, which is the environment. Natural capital has several resources within, so there are natural resources like renewable sources, wood is an example, or even food, that is a renewable source. Then we have non-renewable sources like fossil fuels. There are other living organisms like the animals, and there are also kind of products like solar radiation or water. These are all in the term green. We remember here that this is natural capital. So green entrepreneurship is about profits and natural capital, the relation between those two. Let me now just give you an overview of the session. It has three major blocks. The first one is about greening process, which means enterprises that exist. All types of enterprises can become greener. We will see that later. It is mainly about input of natural capital into the production function of a business and the output of a business, like an externality on the natural capital or on the environment. The second building block will be green products and services, which are itself green. There, the most famous example is renewable energies. They produce energy, electricity from, for example, the sun. Services from those are then solar chargers for cell phones, charging the cell phone with the sun, for example. And the third building block, C, will be adaptation to natural change. You might have heard of climate change, you might have heard of environmental degradation, and business need to adapt to those changing environments. That will be the third building block. Now let's start with the greening the process, so greening of enterprises. We were saying that the main objective of a business is profit. Now, for making that profit, we have several inputs which we need. These are namely capital, labor, and in modern economic theory we have natural capital. So we have here capital, labor, and natural capital. So we have K, L, and often it is used as R as resources. So the objective, you might know that from microeconomics, the objective of production of a service, let's say that is the production function, is to use a certain amount of capital and labor and natural capital, and then reach the profit, like this. Now, let me ask you a question. How many burgers, those nice burgers from fast food, are you able to eat? My experience is the first burger is okay, the second is still good, the third is becoming full, and the fourth maybe is enough. So there are limits of demand for your product or for your service, because after a certain amount that you invested, capital, labor and natural capital, the demand might be saturated. So you can't grow your profits. You can grow them by a little bit. You might even sell some burgers to the outside world, but there are limits to those. So now we will see three major possibilities on how to increase profits by reducing, reducing the natural capital. So natural capital, we will keep capital and labor input constant. Let's say you employ 2 or 3 people, or you're even alone. So you have a car and you do a delivery business. So you need, for that car, you need natural capital in form of fuel. You put fuel into the car and you deliver, and then you have a certain profit out of that business. So now let me tell you one story when I have been last time to Nairobi, or even the 2 last times to Nairobi. When I went to the airport, I stuck in traffic jam. That is normal, or not a normal, but that is quite usual in African cities, like in Nairobi and urban centers, not only Africa, even in Europe you stuck in traffic. And I missed the airplane. That was not one time, but that was even 2 times, the last 2 times I have been to Nairobi. So the loss in terms of work and the loss in terms of money for my business, if I had been a business, was enormous for the flight as well as for the time. So if I had calculated better and reduced travel time by traveling earlier, I would have caught the flight and I would not have lost that money and that time. So the same for this business, delivering some kinds of products in the city, leaving at 9, you will stuck in the traffic jam and you will not be able to reach your clients as quickly as you would do leaving at maybe 6 in the morning. So reduce the natural capital input, for example fuel, leaving at 6 o'clock in the morning. You won't get stuck in the traffic jam, you travel quickly, you use half of the fuel. So even if your demand or your possibility, because you just have one car and you're an own driver, even if this is constant, by reducing the use of natural capital, can help you with the same input receive higher profits. Meaning that if you have just some funds to buy your fuel, if you can just or reduce the use of natural capital, which is fuel in that side, but just because of leaving earlier, you reach that point. So you don't need to increase. Capital or labor, but you can by just reducing the use of natural capital, you can increase profit. That is nothing new, that is efficiency. And the first block, I said there are 3 options. The first block is energy efficiency or material efficiency. Imagine your textile industry, when you just use less of the input, like cotton, because you just optimized the way that you do your clothes. When you reduce with the same output level, you can increase profits through efficiency strategies. The next one would be, imagine that is what we call no cost efficiency gains, because you just change your habits or your knowledge. Now you can also imagine the car driver of that business buys a new car, which is 50% more efficient. So you can imagine the use of natural capital can be reduced by an investment in a new technology. So instead of only changing the habit, the driver could invest in a more efficient technology, which leads him to higher profits, again by reducing the natural capital. For sure, there you need to make an investment plan to see what is the payback period, etc. The third way to improve your profits is about completely new kind of ways of production, like substitution. For example, that is a pump for my bicycle, because I'm driving to work. Instead of standing in the traffic jam, instead of paying insurance for the car, instead of paying fuel, I drive to work 30 minutes. It keeps me even healthy. And now, instead of using a car, that delivery service might think of using a bicycle with no cost of natural capital. So here we have reduced costs, and we improve the efficiency of that production function, and we have a new production function which looks like that. So in growth theory, to come back, we have the option to grow just on the same production function that we are using, by using more capital, more labor, and more natural capital. Nevertheless, we have only limited ways to grow because of demand constraints or even investment constraints that we have. But we can increase profit through greening the process by changing the production function from here to here, and reach, for example, with the same input, reach a higher profit. So now that is very theoretical, and the term behind is to increase total factor productivity as an option to grow your business and to make profits. Concretely, what does that mean? Natural capital, as we said, are input factors in your production function. So concretely, what can be done in your business is each month, just let's say we are starting the accounting for March. We have now an accounting, a similar one to all other types of accounting, and we account now for natural capital. Think of your business. What type of natural capital are you using as input? We are talking still about the input into the production function. So, for example, water is used by most businesses. So we can say how many liters. We just, as an example, say 100 liters. In March we used 100 liters. And the cost, the quantity the quantity and the cost we can just account for, and the cost maybe was for fresh water was $10 in that case. Now what else do we have? Think of a textile business that I mentioned before. We have cotton. Again, we have a quantity and we have a price for that. So we list each month, we list all natural capital that we use in our production function. In addition to the classical one, which I mentioned, like fuel was another one, we have other type of natural capital, as I indicated that morning, that before. There are services which are provided by nature, like regulative services. You produce with your car some emissions, or with a factory some emissions, and nature provides you with clean air every day. These services have no cost. Nevertheless, we have natural capital as what we call goods. Then we also have services, like regulating ones. There are no cost, no quantity maybe, and no cost. Nevertheless, these are services provided by nature, like clean air or like the purification of water. In addition to those services, we have cultural identification. Imagine you work in tourism. You need, in order to attract tourists, you need a nice scenery on your web page or a nice scenery on your brochure to attract tourists from other parts of the world, to show them that this is a nice place. So in case of a natural park, a big nice picture that identifies your country is of help for not only marketing, but then also for your business, which is in tourism. So we have identification, we have goods, services, identification, and then we have what is called support. The whole environment, like the earth, is supporting your business. So these are support services of nature. And you might think of, so identification is a picture, maybe, picture of a scenery. And support services are very difficult to identify, and here also for the picture of the scenery there's no cost, because that is nature that has this quality of providing that. So even if you don't have any costs for those, you might account for them, because we will see later there might be an investor in that natural park that you get your benefits from tourism, who destroys that scenery, and then it becomes a cost for your business, because your tourism business might die. So accounting for natural resources and natural capital is the first thing. Now, what I was saying in that theory, how can we now become more efficient and grow, not only by quantity on that production function, but how can we become more productive by reducing the natural capital? So here you might then also list for what you use water, or for what you use the fuel, and in the case of fuel it is the easiest. You just calculate the liters that you use in your car, and you see whether you are able to reduce the input of that natural capital in the production function. The environmental rule for this accounting and then reduction to be sustainable, meaning that your business is not contributing to environmental degradation. The rule is called regeneration rule. So the idea is you use as many of those natural resources as many are able to regenerate. For example, now you ask me fuel. That is not possible because fuel ends, and that is a resource that is not renewable. The stocks are maybe depleted in 100 years' time. So there you might also think, if that is also a bottleneck in your business, in resources like fuel, you might think in Africa, in some centers, urban centers, there are shortages, and that might also hinder your business. So you might think of other sources which are more reliable, for example. So you might think of fuel. What else can you use? As I said, you might substitute your business with a bicycle, or you find other ways, like then in advanced economies like electric cars, which start to be sold, etc. With that accounting, you can try to reduce the input into the production function, reduce costs, and increase profits. Now, we said in the greening of the process of your business, you not only have inputs, but you also have outputs. So a factory, for example, as we had the example of the textile industry, might have a factory and they produce not only smoke that is polluting the air, but they might produce also, because they are dyeing their textiles, they are also producing wastewater, which affects the river. This type of wastewater is very polluted due to the chemicals that they use, and for many European countries during the industrialization, all the fishes in that river, then they died. So there are, you can imagine, some fishermen who lose their income because they can't fish anymore the fish that they get usually out of that river. So a business, whatever business you have, will have an externality on the environment. This externality might be more severe, like in this, but might be less severe, like in the case of the driver who just pollutes a little bit of the air with his car. Nevertheless, what a business can do in order to reduce the externality that it has, because in the long run that business might only affect the fishermen fishing from that river, but it might also use fresh water as an input, as we have seen in the production. So while polluting it and using it, once the river is too polluted, maybe the clothes cannot be washed anymore. They will get dirty or even destroyed by that high toxic water. The rule that applies to that example is the assimilation rule. A business should try, in that case, the dyeing or the textile business should try to have reduced its negative externality, to reduce it, that this wastewater becomes usable, that the fish still start to grow, and that the water, the river, can absorb it in a way that it is assimilated, that there's no negative impact for other businesses or for the factory itself, who needs fresh water. So the same that we have done with the input, we can do also with the output. So for March, we make an accounting like the output, like wastewater, and we can quantify, again, as we used 100 liters in that case, we can now say we have 100 liters of wastewater. There might be no cost in several countries because there's no regulation and there's no obligation for that industry. Nevertheless, we can, and that is the idea of green businesses, we can improve not only the environment, but we can make a business. Now imagine that the water costs $10 per month. Now the wastewater that is just pumped into the river could be reused. So one strategy to deal with the negative output, with the externality, is to reuse the products that your business is producing. For example, through a constructed wetland, you can filter that water and reuse it in the production cycle. So you might not have here the $10 that we had in the other one. We might reduce that because we can have a life cycle where we always use the same water. Another example, now we don't have it in here, in that room. You might know the printers. Xerox, these are the big printers which we have here in our office in the International Labour Organization. And these printers, they are built with already thinking of the disposal after the lifetime. So they will reuse. Now they target about 80% or even over 80%. They will reuse 80% of that waste that comes after the end of the life cycle. They will reuse it in the production of new printers, where you not only reduce the effect on the environment, but you reduce the cost because you reuse, and this is the first rule. You can reuse parts of your externality that you have. We had the idea of reduce just through efficiency strategies, as in the textile case. The third R, and this is a 3R strategy, is recycling. Recycling, after you tried in your business to think of how you can reuse or reduce negative externalities. The third option could be recycling. So for example, if you have organic material that you produce because you're a flower business, for example, you can use that organic waste, which you typically just dump. You can use that or to make, for example, compost, or you can make it and press it into eco briquettes, where you can then sell it even on the market to women and men in communities for cooking. So recycling is another way of how you can use the output or the externality in a business. To summarize, what we call greening the process or greening the enterprise, all type of businesses have the potential to do so. Environmental management systems are ways to systematically look at the input and the output, as we have done in that case. You might Google in the World Wide Web and you might find environmental management systems where you can systematically improve your efficiency, and by improving the efficiency, reduce costs and improve profits. Let me now come to the second block. The second block is about green products and services. The first one was about greening enterprises, and the second one is about green business ideas, green business products and services, which you can directly sell on the market. Let me start with asking you, how many of you have such a cell phone? I personally have 1.5. I have one here, that is my one, and I have one with my partner. We use it at home. So I have 1.5 of those cell phones. Now let me ask you, what was the situation 10 years ago? How many of you had a cell phone? If you ask me, 10 years ago, that was 2001. That was during my study, so I did not have a cell phone at that time. What I'm trying to say is, when you look at new products in the market, let's say 10 years back or 15 years back, maybe I was a late user of those cell phones, we had no cell phones. There was an innovation, and they found mobiles as a substitution to classical communication technology. So here we have the time, once again, and in the case of Africa, of Sub-Saharan Africa, there are studies that in 1960, where they start, and in 2003, so mobile phones were not existent a long time, and from 2003 the growth of mobile phones was very sharp. So today we have 2010, we have per 100 people, we have around 20 cell phones, the coverage of that. So the growth rates in the last 7 years were approximately 55%. The reason why I'm drawing that graph is, imagine you being a business, the inventor of the cell phone, the only one, a monopoly, and you start to sell cell phones in 2003, and now you're a rich man. Because you have growth rates of 55% per year. Now, what the case is for green entrepreneurs is similar, because green entrepreneurs, like green innovations, they often have a substitutional effect of existing technology and replacing them with a new technology. The communication growth rates might never be achieved, because that was a revolution like the internet. That might not be happen with green products and services. Nevertheless, we can imagine the following case. Let's think of kerosene use in sub-Saharan Africa. We have the time, and we have the quantity of kerosene. So at the beginning, I don't know exactly when, I imagine that was at the beginning of the last century or a little bit later, when we experienced kerosene use. The growth rates might have been similar, but they maybe in the, let's say the 80s, for example, they started to stagnate over the next year and did not grow much, because the need was satisfied. Growth can only, as we have seen in the first graph, growth can only occur through quantity growth, and the price is even higher nowadays. So people are maybe not buying so much more kerosene. The business for a kerosene dealer just selling the kerosene might be not very optimistic those days. If you imagine to start a kerosene selling shop today, you might compete with the others that are already there, and you might not be able to make high profit. Maybe with population growth rates, imagine there are some demand for your kerosene, and you might have a small profit margin in that. We have now technologies like this one. You might know this type of gadget. It is quite cheap at the moment. It's about $20. And this type of lantern is called a solar lantern, and it has similar functions like a kerosene lantern. In rural, non-electrified areas, you can imagine that those type of solar lanterns can replace, to a certain extent, the kerosene. So in 2000, let's say, it started the innovation of such technology. Today we might be still very low. In 2010, maybe we are experiencing just very little sales. Here now in the case of solar lanterns. But if you ask a family what they prefer, kerosene or solar, those that have experienced solar lanterns, mostly they will say, I will go for solar because of reduced smoke, reduced costs. You don't need to rebuy every time your kerosene, and because of the better light quality. So one can imagine if the preference of the consumer is for solar, and today in sub-Saharan Africa we have 70% of people non-electrified, so no electric light. We can imagine that there's a big market, notably this market between those two, that is still not satisfied. So with products like the solar lantern, even if it is not like with communication that we need to make clear, those growth rates are not to be achieved due to different reasons. Nevertheless, the potential for those products are high. This is just one example, and we might now think of more examples. What are green products and services? And we can start with a needs analysis, as every entrepreneur should start to think about what are the needs of consumers, what is the potential, the market potential for the product that will be offered. And we can think in the field, the most basic needs is cooking. Cooking is needed every day, and in, for example, Sub-Saharan Africa, mainly people cook with biomass. In some countries, even over 90% of people cook with biomass. So cooking is a basic need, and when you think of a business opportunity in cooking, you can quickly come up with the idea of what is called improved stoves. You might not see that from here, but you might know those. People that use improved stoves like this one can reduce their energy consumption. Some say 30 to 50%. If that then materializes in the field, that is still to be discussed. Nevertheless, those improved cooking stoves reduces the smoke, and it improves the time that you need for cooking. And today we have in Sub-Saharan Africa, we have 4% of people who use, maybe it's now a little bit higher, the figures might be old, nevertheless, it is under 10% of people who use such kind of improved cooking stoves. So there, when we look at the figure of those people who cook with biomass, and for those people who have improved cooking stoves, the market potential, again, as we have seen in the case of the solar lantern and the kerosene, seems to be quite enormous. Organic waste, as I mentioned before, is an option in the field of cooking or energy. Let's call that cluster energy. So energy is a field. So organic material like shells from nuts or from flowers or just normal waste from the kitchen. Organic waste can be used to compress and to use in cooking. So as we again have 90% of people in Sub-Saharan Africa cooking with biomass, we can find other ways of fuels which are environmentally friendly, which are not destroying the forest, and which can tap into that market. Biogas is another field. You might know that is definitely not for all households, and that is for rural ones. Nevertheless, there are increasing demand for biogas because it's a very cheap way to substitute a former kerosene or wood product that you use for cooking. For lighting, when we talk about energy, we discussed the use of solar lanterns. Nevertheless, even in urban areas, you might know there are these, what is now increasingly used, the light bulbs, which look like that, which are compact fluorescent light bulbs, which reduce the energy consumption. That is another product that might be interesting for your own business, that might be interesting for consumers, because it reduces the cost of electricity, and it has maybe better features than other products. So often, from a green business perspective, you try to think of innovations, what are substitutes, what can be substituted for another product that is maybe polluting, or that is like kerosene, or like wood, that is damaging the environment. In major countries of the world today, you might know we have difficulties with energy security and the fuel price of fossil fuels, which is rising constantly, and governments try to help the economies to use new types of renewable sources, which are from the sun, from water, from biomass, or from the heat of the earth, which is called geothermal, or wind. So governments try to push for these kind of technologies and renewable energy sources to make countries less dependent on external markets and fluctuations, and also to reduce costs. Often huge costs for countries occur through buying diesel or fuels from outside with very negative balance of payments effects, and an opportunity for countries could be to become more energy efficient and producing more renewable energies for less dependence. I just printed one example out, that is the Ministry of Energy of Kenya, feed-in tariffs policy on wind, biomass, small hydro, geothermal, biogas and solar resource generated electricity. That is the first revision from last year in 2010, and they have what they call feed-in tariff. They have subsidized prices for enterprises to invest in those kind of renewable energy sources to increase the incentive. So you as a business, those feed-in tariffs, in Africa there are 6 countries. There's Uganda, Tanzania, Algeria and South Africa, and Mauritius that have feed-in tariffs. All over the world there are 56 countries who have those kind of feed-in tariffs. So there are big opportunities for enterprises to invest in renewable energies and get these subsidies from the government. That might be another business strategy to tap into other markets in the field of energy. Heating is also related to energy. You might know that there are solar water heaters which you put on the rooftop. These are very simple gadgets where you just collect the sunshine in black tubes, and you store the water in a tank, and then you get hot water out of it. They are very cost effective, about $100 to $200. You can already get those tanks for 100 liters, and this is just another example on how you can use renewable energy like the sun in producing a business, as well as reducing maybe costs of electricity which you need, or costs for cooking, because you can heat in those systems with solar radiation. You can heat it even up to 90 degrees Celsius nearly for cooking. So energy seems to be a big field where a lot of business ideas might emerge. Nevertheless, it is not the only one. Think of the example that I've given, the cell phone. As I said, I have 1.5. On average, in Western countries, people have over one cell phone, so the market is completely covered. In Africa, 20 out of 100 people have such a cell phone, but only 74% do not have access to electricity. So only 26% have access to electricity. So those people using cell phones, they need energy or electricity to charge those. So another business idea in communication could be such solar panels. You can plug them in here, and then you can charge your cell phone with a solar panel. That is in the field of communication, where you can see other types of charging than with the generator or with the grid electricity. There are other gadgets for cycles or for cars or for motorbikes, where you can have a simple charger on the wheel, and you can charge your cell phone with a charger by cycling. That could be an option for me. As I drive to work, I could reduce my, I'm thinking now, my electricity bill by that. So there are, in the field of communication, there are also options, green business options, as we call them. Now, coming to another need, apart from energy, which is a basic need for human beings, and a communication, which is a basic need, there's a third need, which is food, the food production itself. Notably, Africa has a very high percentage of labor employed in that sector, and there are many people employed in farming. There are farming techniques that help you to improve productivity, which are organic, as we call them, which are green, where you use natural benefits, like we said, compost. You put it on the field, and you can use it as fertilizer, so as to grow more and in a more productive way. Now you are saying, okay, we can buy chemical fertilizers, but this again is a cost. So in order to reduce cost, even for those who use chemical fertilizers, it is not only equivalent in terms of growth, if you have the right organic fertilizer, but it is even superior production with organic fertilizer, because it improves the soil matter, it improves the soil quality if you use organic fertilizers. In the field of climate change, which we will come a little bit later in our discussion, you will find that organic fertilizers improve, for example, also the water content in soil, even up to 100% after severe rains. Organic fields with organic fertilizers with a lot of humus in it can store better water than other chemical fields. So there are, again, business opportunities for farmers to improve their productivity with using natural resources. The same is for pesticides. There are IPM, integrated pest management methodologies, where you use small micro bacteria who eat then the other negative animals that are eating your plants, etc. I'm not a specialist in that. Nevertheless, there are increasing number of cases where you can find organic, environmental friendly solutions to problems or to difficulties in farming. Irrigation is another case where you could increase water harvesting, or where you could install drip irrigation or invest in drip irrigation to improve productivity of your product. That is only from the supply side, so from the production side there are opportunities. Nevertheless, I brought you my daily food, which is muesli. You might not know that are cereals. Not all over the world that is used, but in Germany, where I'm from, we eat a lot of muesli, we call that. So a lot of cereals. As I'm green, trying to be green as much as possible, not only for the environment, but also for my health, because you might know that chemicals in the food chain affect your health and can, with higher doses, can even make you ill. So that is called a bio, which is a label in Europe, and that label certifies that the cereals are from organic production. This is not the only product that I buy, but all the products that I buy are certified organic food. And I'm not the only one to be sensitive to these kinds of issues, but there's a growing number, notably in developed countries, to look at the health and to be sustainable in the consumption. So the growth rates for organic food in the last 10 years in the world, so mainly US and Northern America and Europe, they were about 20%. Whereas the classical food, or the typical food, which is with chemicals and pesticides, this market only grew by 2 to 3%. So again, we see the potential for green business opportunities is very high, because people say even that the growth rates will be even higher in the next years for organic food. Now Africa has a competitive advantage in that, because people are not using extensively fertilizers which are chemical based, and pesticides as well. So the question is now, how can we access those kind of bio labels, because the opportunity is there. So what, as a business, you can think certification, and not only of food products but also of clothes. Increasingly, consumers in Western countries, they become aware of the negative effects socially as well as environmentally, so they look for fair trade clothes, or they look for fair trade and organic coffee, or even other type of products from mines. One might think of Congo, where there's a new movement to certify production which is clean in a sense. So consumers in Western countries, they become more and more aware. The question is now, how could we access those kind of labels and certification that we need for tapping the higher price that we can achieve with our product. So agriculture is a field where you can look at. In the same, we have forestry. For example, you might know that there's an increasing demand for carbon credits. This is when you have just the carbon in the air of the world. Today we are trying to reduce that carbon, CO2, in the air because of its negative effects on climate change. Because we see it scientifically as a major driver for the hotter climate in the future. Now you might know that trees, they are not like we, but they eat in a sense the carbon, and they stock it in their leaves and then in their wood, which we then use again for cooking. Now in the stoves, which emits it again in the air. No, that is the cycle. And by planting trees, we capture that type of carbon and store it in the tree itself. This is rewarded now in the international market through what is called carbon credits. So there is an increasing number of farmers, even smallhold farmers in Africa, in Asia, as well as in Europe. But increasingly that mechanism of carbon credits is for developing countries, and they give credits to those people who plant trees because they capture the carbon. So again, these are kind of export markets where you can find business ideas in the field of the environment. Research needs to be done on how to access those. This goes too much into detail now, but there are opportunities not only then in tree planting, but also in other renewable energies where you can benefit from what is called the carbon credits. And you can sell those on the international market. We had the case of tourism, where I said the natural capital is providing also service in terms of scenery, in terms of natural park, where tourists are attracted to. And increasingly, as I said, with the organic food, the certified organic food, increasingly tourists want to enjoy nature, they want to enjoy wildlife, and they seek for what is called ecotourism. That is a very new market, niche market still. Nevertheless, the growth rates, as with the organic labeled food, are similar. People want to have a certified tour operator who is not providing a service in big cities with big hotels and with very environmental polluting industry, tourism industry, but who want to go to lonely places in natural parks, and who want to sleep in houses which are built from natural material and enjoy the nature. So another field of green is ecotourism, where you can seek business opportunities. Building, I mentioned, is another field where you can, for example, provide building material which substitutes cement. My house, where I grew up, is a kind of organic house. We only used natural resources and natural renewable resources to construct that house, because it is a healthy environment, it has good insulation, and it uses a lot of renewable sources, and is very energy efficient. That is a trend in Western world. Nevertheless, that is also a trend and can be trend in the developing world, because again, that is a business case. You invest in a house which is zero energy house, where you can use, for example, the heat of the earth through specific installations, and you can use solar water heaters, you can use building materials which are local, and you can reduce your costs. At the same time as the business providing these services or build this house can make a business out of it. So you have again a win-win situation, not only for the environment and the customer who has a reduced cost, but you have also businesses created, and you can find your business option in, for example, the building. Let me just come to the last sector that I choose, which is recycling. Recycling, I mentioned, is a strategy in greening the process, greening the business. Nevertheless, there are increasingly direct businesses producing green products or services from recycling. I was visiting last month a recycling plant in Nairobi in Kenya, and they are using plastic waste, and they are using it in a sort of heater. They heat it and they produce poles. These kind of poles can be used in construction, and these kind of poles can also be used in other type of road works, etc. That is just an idea in recycling. Aluminium, for example, costs 95% less energy if you recycle it instead of going to a mine, extracting it and producing it. So there are high opportunities in the recycling sector. The same for paper. 70% of less energy if you use recycled paper instead of cutting down trees and producing the paper. Much more opportunities rise in the recycling, notably in those cities which have not yet concluded the work. What is important for those cities, for example, where they have not established a recycling system, the work is very dirty often, and that needs to be taken into account. It is not an option to use the waste pickers in these working conditions. That's for sure a need to be addressed as well. If you open a business, not only look at the green angle of it, but also on the social side, not to be in the recycling. That is very important. So now we have seen business opportunities in the field of energy, in the field of food or agriculture, in the field of communication, in tourism, and in building industry and recycling. There are other opportunities you might think of, and you might inform yourself about these kind of businesses in the World Wide Web. We have from the International Labour Organization, we will have a publication that we are currently working on, where we capture those type of green small businesses, and we will make that available maybe in the next 6 months. So now let's move to the last block. The last block is about adaptation to environmental change. Let me write that down, because maybe that is also a new field. I mentioned climate change as one driver of change. That is not the only one. More erratic rainfall might occur, more heat waves, a general hotter climate in the future, sometimes more droughts, sometimes more floods. The climate is becoming more unpredictable. That is the main first effect of climate change. Environmental degradation is another driver of change. We mentioned the factory who is polluting the river. Increasingly in industrial countries, we have problems with wastewater and with the negative effects of those. Or you might imagine the deforestation that we face. For a business who uses timber for kind of tables or furniture in a certain community, and the business is living in an environment where the trees around are all cut because of energy needs, or maybe because there are bigger investors. That business that is now here producing the tables out of wood, etc., might not be able to produce it anymore due to environmental change. In that case, deforestation. The same is now for the wood seller selling wood to communities for cooking. Or in the case of climate change, there are examples. A 2-degree increase in Uganda might not make the country may make the country unsuitable for coffee. So what with those coffee farmers today? What should those coffee farmers become in 50 years' time when we have that 2-degree increase? These are just some examples of businesses like the carpenter or the crop grower of coffee, which might die. So the business, in summary, need to adapt to changes of the environment, changes of the natural environment makes businesses need to adapt to those. So what can a carpenter in that case do in case he's facing wood shortages? As we said in the first block, the regeneration rule applied would mean that he put small trees, and he grew small trees so that even if those trees are cut, they are regenerated for his business. The coffee might not be able, the coffee grower might not be able to adapt to those changes because, as we said, the area will not be suitable for coffee with 2-degree increase. So the coffee might adapt in another way. The coffee might switch to, not sure if that is feasible, just an idea to cocoa, or might even stop doing coffee and agriculture and might do a complete other business or need to do another business. Now, for those fishermen which we described at the beginning, where the fish already died, that is not only through pollution but also through overfishing in the oceans. You might have heard that there might be a major shortage of fish in the future due to overfishing. So what can the fishermen do to adapt to those changes? The fisherman might think of a pond where he grows his own fish, or he, living in a coastal area, might even think of migrating to another place and going to open another business. So the idea of making entrepreneurs aware of environmental change is to highlight that there are external effects that the business cannot control, like deforestation or like climate change, the increase in temperature which will kill the plants, or the fishing, the overfishing, which the entrepreneur cannot control and where he or she needs to adapt to. So in business, when planning, should look at those external drivers for change related to the natural environment. So when you plan your business, you need to think of what are external drivers like climate change. You might look at the website that exists, predicting the temperature increase or the effects that it will have. Now, living in a coastal area, when we said the fisherman even might live with his family and has a house at the sea, this fisherman might see that in the future this area will be flooded and destroy his house. So a strategy might be even to migrate, not only because of the fish that is lacking, but also because climate change or flooding will affect his livelihoods and his housing. So an entrepreneur who is aware of these external effects can then plan. Will I plant a business at the coastal side, or will I maybe move a little bit further inside and build my business to 2 kilometers from the coast. The same for insurance. A farmer looking at the climate predictions might think, okay, 2-degree increase and the variation of the weather will lead to so many more droughts in a certain period of time. I will invest now in an insurance scheme where I can recover my losses when the weather is getting bad. So there are options for the entrepreneur to look at drivers for change coming from the environment and adapt to these changes. So that was the case of direct effects of natural degradation and climate change. Now there are indirect effects, like national legislation. That were here the direct, the physical effects on the business, but we also have the indirect ones, like legislation. There are more and more governments, as I said, with the feed-in tariffs for renewable energy subsidized, but there are also rules and regulations and taxes which you might need to look at to be conform. In some countries, like in Europe, there are even requirements for export with certain certification, like the ones from the International Standards Organization, where you need to prove that your business has a certain environmental management system. The most used is the 14001 standard in Europe, and these are requirements for export, for example. Others type of regulations can be local, where, as we said, for the dyeing industry, where there might be some obligations for water, sewage, etc. So there are other drivers of change, not the direct effects of the environment, but indirect, which is legislation. Then we have also the consumers. The consumer change, as I said, I will buy organic labeled food. That might be the case also for kerosene or for other type of products, where consumers are more aware and are not willing to buy kind of non-organic products and services. The same for the flower industry. Increasingly, people want to have fair trade flowers or green flowers, and not those with many pesticides and undecent working conditions. So the consumer might also be a driver of change, because the consumer is requesting now flowers with an organic label on it. The last driver for change in the field of environment is the business itself. This is through supply chains, often requirements from other businesses using your products or services. They require certain types of legislation. So that might also be a driver that your business need to adapt to. So that was the third block, and now let me summarize what we have seen. So we had the greening process, where we tried to see the case of increasing profits by becoming more efficient, notably more material and more energy efficient. That can be just change in behavior. As I said, instead of driving at 9, driving at 6 to avoid the traffic jam and reduce the cost. That can be through new type of investments, like new cars with less consumption, which makes the enterprise more efficient, or that can be even a substitution, like driving with a bicycle to work. So in the greening process, all types of business, and that is important to know, even those producing very dangerous products for the environment, they can become greener, because there are technology innovations and there are always options to green the business. So that applies to all businesses that are established or are going to be established. Then we have seen as a second major block, we have seen green products and services which directly supply the manufacturers of the solar lantern, the cell phone service charger, selling the service of charging the phone, or the organic food production, labeling it and exporting it for a growing market, or the improved stove business, etc. So the whole block of green products and services. And as a third, we have seen needs to adapt to natural change because of climate change, reducing maybe water or increasing the temperature. Business need to think of what are drivers of change in the field of environment and climate, deforestation, pollution of water, etc., and see where the business is affected and how to adapt to those. And then the legislation and the consumers and the business that commands also the drivers of change. So we have seen the third bit of business need to adapt to natural change, or drivers that are related to this natural change. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that was a first teaser and introduction to green entrepreneurship, and wish you all the best in further continuing or starting a green business, or greening your business, or teaching green business, or whatever you're planning to do. Thank you very much. Goodbye.